Imagine standing in a small Flemish room in 1434 and reading, carved and painted across a mirror, Johannes de Eyck was here. That simple, confident line, like graffiti from the distant past, belongs to Jan van Eyck, the quiet prodigy who rewrote how paint could describe the world. In his hands, oil did not merely color forms. It captured the sheen of satin, the hard glint of a mirror, the moist geography of an eye. He painted intimate portraits that feel alive, multi-paneled altarpieces that open like theaters of light, and domestic interiors loaded with meaning. Today, we will walk through the life, the inventions, the paradoxes of a man who is both meticulously documentary and mysteriously poetic. We will look at the Ghent Altarpiece's towering vision and the hush of the Arnolfini chamber, at radiant Madonnas and faces so present they might turn and speak. Along the way, I'll share curious human details, the signatures that act like fingerprints, the disputed authorship of great works, the tiny trick that makes pearls look wet, and we'll try to hear, across 6 centuries, a single artist's precise, insistent voice. Jan van Eyck's life begins in fragments. He was likely born in the Meuse region, perhaps in Eyck around the 1390s, and by the 1420s he had entered the orbit of powerful Burgundian patrons. The record is spotty. Fewer letters, fewer diaries than for later artists, but documents place him at courts and in itinerant service to dukes. He worked alongside his brother Hubert, a collaboration blurred by time. The famous Ghent Altarpiece bears an inscription that suggests Hubert began it and John finished it. Curiosity. Historians once argued the younger brother did all the work. Now most attribute the brilliance of surface detail to John, while respecting Hubert's initial design. He moved through churches and palaces not just as a painter, but as a court servant, sometimes an agent, sometimes a restorer, sometimes a procurer of pigments and frames. This practical life, traveling, negotiating, delivering pictures to patrons, tempered his painterly ambition. When we face his portraits, we are looking at someone who understands power, ceremony, and the quiet tyranny of a commissioned image. Jan's catalog, What Survives and What Scholars Accept, reads like a map of Northern Renaissance achievement. At the center is the Ghent Altarpiece, the polyptych often called the Adoration of the Mystic Lamb, delivered around 1432. It is a cathedral-scale miracle. Saints and prophets, a luminous virgin, Adam and Eve resurrected as monumental, luminous figures. Curiosity. The Adam panel reads like sculpture in paint, muscular, tactile, and it changed how painters imagined the human body. The Arnolfini Portrait of 1434 feels like the opposite miracle. A single double portrait in a domestic interior, a mirror reflecting 2 extra figures, a signature, a candle burning in high noon. Scholars debate whether it records a marriage, a betrothal, or a legal contract. The painting is as sociological as it is visual. Then there are the refined devotional pictures, Madonna of Chancellor Roland in the Louvre, the Virgin and Child with Canon van der Pijl, where his backgrounds open into believable landscapes and his surfaces glow with jewel-like clarity. Portraits, Baudouin de Lannoy, Cardinal Albergati, and the so-called Portrait of a Man in a Turban reveal a new psychology. Faces that combine individualized anatomy with an almost forensic attention to texture. Curiosity. The Portrait of a Man in a Turban is often read as a self-portrait, both candid and theatrical. Key moments rerouted Jan's path. One turning point was his association with the Burgundian court. Service to Philip the Good and other nobles gave him steady commissions and the freedom to experiment. Another was his work on large-scale polyptychs begun in collaboration with his brother. Those projects demanded planning across years, coordination of panels, and invention of pictorial systems to unify many scenes. Curiosity. Jan was not just an image maker, but a kind of visual engineer, arranging panels so light could read continuity across hinged surfaces. A later turning moment came with international exchange. Flemish realism began to travel to Italian patrons, and vice versa. Whether John personally taught or traveled is debated, but his approach to oil glazing and texture reached beyond the Low Countries and altered the ambitions of portraitists and altarpiece makers across Europe. Finally, his death in 1441 closed a brief but incandescent career. His workshop continued, but his voice, so exact and so quietly authoritative, remained singular. What makes a Van Eyck a Van Eyck? The technique. He perfected a method of oil painting that relied on many thin, translucent glazes, layers of pigment mixed with oil, building depth and subtlety like musical harmonics. Define glaze, a transparent layer of paint that modifies color beneath it. He often began with precise underdrawings and a light ground, then blocked in form and over months, maybe years, added glazes, scumbled highlights, and microscopic details. Curiosity. He used brushes so fine that individual hairs could render the glint on a pearl or the red capillaries in an eyelid. Look closely at the Arnolfini mirror or the atom panel from Ghent. Reflections, distant figures, tiny inscriptions, all these are technical feats of scaling, perspective, and optics. He favored hard panels as supports, oak mostly, because they allowed the patience of layering. Canvas would come later for other uses. He also manipulated varnishes and resin glues to sharpen edges and raise contrast without losing transparency. All of this created surfaces that simultaneously read as soft flesh and as brittle metal, a duel between tactile suggestion and high finish. Jan's paintings teem with recurring motifs: a dog for fidelity, a single lit candle for the divine presence, oranges and jewels for wealth, carved saints and tiny books for devotion. But he never reduced these objects to mere emblems. He made them persuasive, embedded in believable spaces, so that their symbolism emerges naturally. In the Arnolfini room, every object is both literal and allegorical. The convex mirror reflects witnesses. The carved saint on the bedpost recalls protection. The green dress signals fertility or status, depending on how you read it. Religious works balance the human and the heavenly. The Ghent Altarpiece stages the adoration as a cosmic drama, but anchors it with faces that feel known. Curiosity. Van Eyck loved mirrors and reflections, not just for technical showmanship, but as metaphors for vision itself. How images can fold the world back on itself, making painting a question about seeing. Repeated too is his fascination with textiles, velvet, fur, brocade, painting them as distinct forces that shape the figure's social identity. In his lifetime, Jan was celebrated. Court records show payments, commissions, and respect. Yet the centuries after his death brought disputes. Attributions became a taxonomic headache: what belongs to Jan, what to his workshop, what to followers. The Ghent Altarpiece sparked major debate over Hubert's role versus Jan's, and art historians still negotiate that division of labor. Curiosity. Whole chapters of scholarship have turned on a single stroke, whether a fold or a highlight, deciding authorship. Later eras lionized or dismissed Van Eyck in different ways. The 19th century rediscovered him as a foundational Northern Renaissance master, a label that reshaped modern narratives of European art. Controversies also entered conservation. Long-term restorations and wartime movements of panels created ethical puzzles. How much restoration honors an original and how much imposes a later taste? Still, consensus holds. Van Eyck raised the bar for technical finish, psychological presence, and symbolic density in painting. Jan van Eyck became a hinge between medieval craft and Renaissance observation. His insistence on surface truth, textures, reflections, the exactness of light pushed painters to see with new fidelity. Northern artists like Rogier van der Weyden and later Albrecht Dürer absorbed and amplified his realism. Even Italian painters who prized disegno took notice of his luminous oil surfaces. Curiosity. Some historians argue that the diffusion of Van Eyck's methods helped shift the whole continent toward oil as a dominant medium, though he did not invent oil paint. The workshop tradition he left, paintings completed or continued by assistants, also shaped how large commissions were organized across Europe. Today, art schools still study his brushwork and his use of optical devices. Museums pack rooms to look for that sharpness of seeing that only a Van Eyck can deliver. His fingerprints survive not just on panels, but on the very vocabulary of Western painting: observation, fidelity, and the belief that the smallest detail matters. A few small delights about Jan that reward the patient viewer. He signed in different languages, Latinized and vernacular, sometimes adding the date, sometimes the mysterious Fuit hic, was here, as if to announce a presence more than ownership. He painted eyes with a wetness that reads like breath. A single highlight can turn paint into a living tear. The Ghent Altarpiece has a storied afterlife: fragments, thefts, restorations, that reads like an action novel of art history. And finally, there is the human curiosity. We know him through contracts and payments and the surfaces he left us, but not through private diaries. So Van Eyck remains partly a forensic problem and partly a poet. His work is the eloquent testimony he left behind. To end, stand again before the mirror of Jan van Eyck's work. The faces he painted seem to inhabit a world where detail is devotion and observation is prayer. He showed us how oil could translate the world into paint that glows from within. He taught a Europe that the small, exact thing, the glint on a pearl, the ripple in a curtain, the letter carved on a frame, could anchor universal meaning. His paintings remain stubbornly modern in their insistence that seeing is a moral act. Curiosity as a final note. When you look at an old Van Eyck, you are looking at someone who used technique to ask a question. How closely can we look before the world becomes both clearer and more mysterious? That tension, precision folded into mystery, that is his lasting gift. Jan van Eyck, a technician of light, a poet of surfaces, a witness who centuries later still whispers, "I was here."